I'm Loretta, 32 female. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the city, a place I've slowly turned into my sanctuary with second-hand books and an embarrassing number of thriving houseplants. As a senior data analyst for a major tech firm, my life is a world of numbers, patterns, and logic, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos my family often created. This story is about the moment the numbers finally stopped adding up in my personal life, and how one single penny became the final entry in a ledger I should have closed years ago. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The email landed in my inbox at 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. The subject line was simple: "Congratulations." My heart did a frantic little tap dance against my ribs. For 6 long months, I had been pouring every spare ounce of my energy into the Odyssey project, a massive data migration and analytics overhaul for our biggest client. It was my baby. I'd worked weekends, skipped lunches, and survived on a diet that was 80% coffee and 20% sheer willpower. My direct supervisor had been hinting for weeks that if I pulled it off, a significant promotion was on the table: the role of lead data strategist, a position that came with a corner office, a team of my own, and a salary that would finally allow me to start seriously saving for a down payment on a house. My hands trembled as I clicked the email open. The words swam before my eyes, but I caught the important ones: "Pleased to offer you the position, outstanding contribution, and effective immediately." A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me. I did it. I actually did it. I leaned back in my chair, a huge, goofy grin spreading across my face, and let out a quiet whoop of victory. My colleagues in the nearby cubicles looked over, and when I gave them a thumbs up, a small round of applause broke out. It felt incredible. The first thing I wanted to do was share the news with my family. We weren't the most demonstrative bunch, but this was huge. My sister Laura was 4 years older and had always been the center of attention. As a burgeoning lifestyle influencer, her life was a curated collection of perfect moments, from her immaculate home to her 2 photogenic children. My mom, Linda, a retired nurse, lived for Laura's updates, her phone a constant stream of my sister's latest posts. My dad, Martin, was a quiet man, a semi-retired contractor who usually followed my mom's lead. I, Loretta, was the stable one, the quiet one. My achievements were often met with a polite nod before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Laura's latest brand collaboration or my nephew's soccer tournament. Still, this was different. This wasn't just a good grade on a test. This was a life-changing career move. I pulled out my phone and opened our family group chat, a space usually dominated by pictures of my niece and nephew. My fingers flew across the screen. "Huge news, everyone. I got the promotion. I'm officially the new lead data strategist. So excited to celebrate with you all soon." I hit send, my thumb hovering over the screen, imagining the replies that would flood in. Maybe my mom would call immediately, her voice filled with pride. Maybe Laura would suggest a celebratory dinner. Maybe my dad would send a simple, heartfelt, "Well done, kiddo." I waited. 1 minute passed, then 5. My phone remained silent. The little scene icon appeared under my message, showing that my mom, dad, and Laura had all read it, but there were no replies, no calls, no celebratory emojis. Nothing, just crickets. I tried to rationalize it. Laura was probably busy with the kids. My mom was likely in the middle of something. My dad rarely checked his phone. It was fine. They'd reply when they had a chance. I packed up my things, still buzzing from the promotion, and headed home. On the way, I treated myself to a nice bottle of champagne, picturing a small celebration for one. As I walked into my apartment, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. The silence was starting to feel heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on my earlier excitement. I sent a follow-up message. "Thinking of going out for a celebratory dinner this weekend if anyone is free? My treat." Again, the message was read by all 3 of them within minutes. And again, complete and utter silence. The bubble of my joy didn't just pop, It deflated slowly, painfully, leaving a cold, hollow feeling in its place. I poured myself a glass of the champagne I'd bought. It was supposed to be a celebratory drink, but the bubbles tasted flat, the sweetness cloying. I drank it alone in my quiet apartment, scrolling through Laura's social media. She'd posted 3 times since I sent my message. One post was a slow-motion video of her son kicking a soccer ball, complete with dramatic music. Another was a poll asking her followers which of 2 expensive handbags she should buy. The third was a selfie of her and my mom smiling over coffee at a trendy cafe, captioned, "Best afternoons are with my amazing mama." It was time-stamped for an hour after I'd sent my text. They had been together. They had seen my message. And they had chosen to ignore it. The hurt was sharp and immediate, a familiar ache I'd felt countless times before. It was the time I won a citywide math competition in high school, only to have my parents miss the award ceremony for one of Laura's dance recitals. It was the time I graduated from university with top honors, and my celebratory dinner was cut short because Laura's boyfriend had a sudden emergency that required everyone's attention. My accomplishments were always background noise to the main event of Laura's life. I spent the rest of the week trying to push it down. I focused on my new role, diving into the responsibilities and meeting my new team. My best friend, Anne, a sharp and incredibly loyal corporate lawyer, took me out for a lavish dinner where we celebrated properly. She listened patiently as I recounted the non-reaction from my family, her expression hardening with each detail. "That's not just rude, Loretta," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "That's a statement. They're telling you that your success doesn't matter to them, or worse, that it inconveniences them." I knew she was right, but the truth was a bitter pill to swallow. I wanted to believe it was just an oversight, a massive, collective brain fade. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't an oversight. It was a message, sent loud and clear through the crushing medium of silence. They saw my joy, my success, my big news, and they felt nothing. Or, at least, nothing worth acknowledging. The week that should have been one of the proudest of my life was tainted by their indifference. And as the days ticked by, that initial hurt began to curdle, solidifying into something colder and harder. It was the beginning of a profound shift inside me, a quiet recalibration of what family truly meant. The silence wasn't just an absence of congratulations. It was the sound of a door quietly, but firmly, closing. I just didn't realize yet that I would be the one to lock it. Exactly 8 days after my promotion announcement was met with a void of digital silence, my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat. For a split second, a foolish, hopeful part of me thought it might be a belated congratulations. Perhaps my mom had finally realized how hurtful their silence had been. Perhaps Laura was going to apologize for being so wrapped up in her own world. The hope was fragile, a tiny flickering flame in the cold cavern of my disappointment. I opened the chat. The message wasn't from my mom, it was from Laura, and it wasn't an apology. It was a link to a high-end gift registry, followed by a long, effusive message. "Hi everyone," it began, dripping with a manufactured cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge. "As you all know, Dad's big 6-0 is just around the corner, and Mom and I have been planning the most amazing surprise party for him. We've booked the private room at the Oak Room downtown, hired a wonderful jazz trio, and are putting together a truly memorable evening to celebrate the best dad in the world." I scrolled past the exclamation points and heart emojis, a knot tightening in my stomach. The message continued, detailing the elaborate plans, a custom cake, a professional photographer, even a memory book they were having specially printed. It sounded less like a birthday party and more like a society wedding. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. "To make this all happen and give Dad the celebration he truly deserves," Laura wrote, "we're asking for family to pitch in for the gift. We've found the perfect present for him. A state-of-the-art professional-grade table he's been dreaming of for his workshop, plus a weekend getaway for him and Mom to that lovely spa resort by the lake. The total cost for the gift package is just under $9,000. We've decided to split it 3 ways between us kids. Your share, Loretta, comes out to $3,000. It would be great if you could transfer it to my account by the end of the week so we can finalize the purchase. Can't wait to celebrate with you." I read the message 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. $3,000. She had ignored my career-defining achievement, a moment of profound personal and financial success, for over a week. She and my mother had sat together, read my text, and deliberately chosen not to respond. And now, without a single word of acknowledgement for my life, she was demanding a sum of money that, until a week ago, would have been a significant financial strain for me. The audacity was breathtaking. It was so brazen, so utterly devoid of self-awareness, that it almost felt like a prank. But it wasn't a prank. A minute later, my mother chimed in right below Laura's message. "It's going to be such a beautiful evening for your father. He deserves the best. I know we can count on you, honey." The 1-2 punch of it all winded me. Laura's entitled demand, immediately followed by our mother's gentle, guilt-laden endorsement. This was their dynamic, a well-oiled machine of manipulation. Laura would make the outrageous request, and my mother would provide the emotional cover, framing it as a matter of love and familial duty. To refuse would be to declare that I didn't think my father deserved the best. My hands were shaking, a mixture of rage and a strange, liberating clarity washing over me. The hurt I had felt the week before was now being rapidly displaced by a cold, hard anger. They hadn't just ignored me. They had deemed my existence, my successes, and my feelings completely irrelevant, except when it came to my financial utility. I wasn't a daughter or a sister in that moment. I was an ATM. An ATM they expected to dispense cash on demand, no pleasantries required. I thought about the years of slights, the countless times my achievements were minimized. I remembered my university graduation, where my parents gave me a $100 gift card, a gesture that felt more like an obligation than a celebration. A few months later, for Laura's 25th birthday, they had co-signed a loan for her to get a brand new car because her old one was just not cute anymore. When I moved into my first apartment, I did it with the help of 2 friends and a rented dolly. When Laura moved into the sprawling suburban house she now occupied, my parents spent a week helping her paint, assemble furniture, and landscape the garden. The pattern was so clear it was nauseating. My independence and financial prudence were not seen as virtues to be celebrated, they were taken for granted. My ability to support myself meant they didn't have to. I was the low-maintenance daughter, the one who never asked for anything, which in their eyes translated into the one who didn't need anything. Not their time, not their attention, and certainly not their celebration. But my money, that was a different story. My newly increased salary, the fruit of the very promotion they couldn't be bothered to acknowledge, was now something they felt entitled to a piece of. I closed the group chat and stood up from my desk, pacing my small living room. The anger was a physical thing, a buzzing energy under my skin. I could write back a furious, multi-paragraph essay detailing their hypocrisy. I could call them and scream until my throat was raw, but what would that accomplish? It would only lead to gaslighting and accusations of me being dramatic or selfish. They would twist my legitimate anger into a character flaw, just as they always had. My friend Anne's words from dinner echoed in my head. That's a statement. Their silence was a statement. Their demand was a statement. It was time for me to make a statement of my own. Not a loud, angry one that they could easily dismiss. I needed something different. Something they couldn't argue with. Something that was as cold, clear, and dismissive as their own behavior. I looked at the demand on my phone again. Your share comes out to $3,000. The number seemed obscene. The injustice of it all was a weight in my chest. But as I stared at the screen, the anger began to subside, replaced by an icy resolve. An idea, small and petty but powerfully symbolic, began to form in my mind. It was an idea that would cost me almost nothing but would say everything. An idea that would finally balance the ledger. The demand for $3,000 acted like a key, unlocking a Pandora's box of memories I had long suppressed or explained away. For years, I had operated under the assumption that my family was just forgetful, that they were busy. That Laura, with her husband, 2 kids, and meticulously curated online life, simply had more going on than I did. It was easier to believe that their slights were unintentional oversights rather than deliberate choices. It was a coping mechanism, a way to maintain a semblance of peace and avoid confrontation. But with their latest demand ringing in my ears, I could no longer afford the luxury of that self-deception. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was a carefully maintained system of selective importance. I spent that evening not pacing in anger, but sitting with a notepad and a pen, conducting a painful audit of my family life. I started with my 30th birthday, 2 years prior. I had wanted to do something special, a dinner at a nice restaurant with my family and a few close friends. I'd sent out an invitation a month in advance. My parents and Laura had all confirmed they would be there. 2 days before the dinner, Laura called me. "Hey," she'd said, her voice rushed. "So, something's come up. My friend from college is in town just for that one night, and she's having a little get-together. It's been ages since I've seen her. You understand, right?" I didn't, but I said I did. An hour later, my mom called. "Loretta, honey, Laura tells me she can't make it to your dinner. You know, it just wouldn't feel right celebrating without your sister there. Maybe we can just do a quiet family thing another time." They never rescheduled. My 30th birthday dinner consisted of me and my friend Anne, who, upon hearing the news, had promptly booked a table at an even nicer restaurant and insisted on paying for everything. I jotted it down on the notepad. 30th birthday, canceled for Laura's friend. The list grew alarmingly quickly. There was the time I was hospitalized for a severe case of pneumonia. I was in the hospital for 4 days. Anne visited every single day, bringing magazines and smuggling indecent coffee. My parents visited once, for about 20 minutes, on their way to one of my nephew's baseball games. Laura sent a text message on day 3 that read, "Heard sick. Get well soon. Pneumonia hospital stay, 1 20-minute visit." I remembered the launch of a major project at my old job, the predecessor to the one I'd just been promoted for. It was a huge success and got a write-up in a local business journal. I was so proud. I bought several copies and brought one over to my parents' house. I showed it to them, my photo and a quote featured prominently in the article. My dad glanced at it and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear." My mom was on the phone with Laura, talking her through a crisis involving a Mies-delivered package of organic, gluten-free toddler snacks. The newspaper was left on the coffee table and was in the recycling bin by the time I left. Business Journal feature, ignored for toddler snacks. The financial slights were just as numerous. I never asked for money, not once. After college, I worked 2 jobs to pay off my student loans in under 5 years. I drove a 10-year-old car until the repair bills outweighed its value. I learned to cook, to budget, to be self-sufficient. Meanwhile, Laura's life was a series of financial bailouts, all framed as either unfortunate circumstances or necessary investments in her happiness. There was the down payment for their house, which my parents gifted them a substantial sum for. There were the expensive private school fees for the kids, which my parents helped out with every year. There was the time her husband's car broke down, and my dad bought them a new one, calling it an early Christmas present. Each time the narrative was the same. "Laura just has so much on her plate," my mother would say. "It's different for her." It was different. The more I wrote, the clearer the picture became. My family operated on a 2-tiered system. Laura was the high-priority account, requiring constant deposits of time, attention, and money. I was the utility account, expected to function reliably in the background and be available for withdrawals when needed. My successes were ignored because celebrating them would require an emotional deposit they weren't willing to make. It would mean acknowledging that my life, my career, and my happiness were also important and worthy of attention. It was far easier to keep me in my designated box, the responsible, quiet daughter who never needed anything and could therefore be safely ignored. The most painful realization was how I had enabled it. By never complaining, by always saying, "I understand," by quietly swallowing my disappointment time and time again, I had taught them exactly how they could treat me. I had accepted the crumbs of attention they threw my way and pretended it was a meal. My silence had been mistaken for contentment. My independence was seen not as a strength, but as a pass for their neglect. The final entry I wrote on my list was the most recent: promotion to lead data strategist, ignored for coffee and Instagram. Staring at the list, I felt a profound sadness, a mourning for the family relationship I always wished I had. But the sadness was now tinged with steel. There was no going back. I couldn't unsee this pattern. I couldn't go back to pretending that their behavior was just a series of unfortunate coincidences. It was a strategy, conscious or not, designed to keep the family dynamic exactly as it was, with Laura at the sun and me as a distant, barely visible planet. The demand for $3,000 wasn't just an insult, it was the ultimate test of my compliance. It was them saying, "We have ignored your greatest professional achievement. We have shown you, in no uncertain terms, that your life is secondary to ours. Now, give us a large sum of money to celebrate something we deem important." They expected me to fall in line. They expected me to swallow my hurt, transfer the money, and show up to the party with a smile, perpetuating the cycle. They expected the quiet, responsible Loretta to do what she always did: absorb the disappointment and pay up. But that Loretta was gone. She had died in the silence of that group chat. The person who was left was someone who had just spent an evening staring at a decade of documented proof of her own invisibility. And she was done being invisible. She was done funding a system that was designed to devalue her. The notepad in front of me wasn't just a list of grievances, it was evidence. It was the justification for what I was about to do next. It was my permission slip to finally, irrevocably, change the terms of our relationship. The idea of simply sending a single penny was satisfying on a petty level, but the data analyst in me wanted more. I needed to quantify the injustice. I needed to see the numbers, the cold, hard facts that underpinned the emotional neglect. So, I did what I do best. I opened a spreadsheet. Over the next 2 days, I went on an archaeological dig through my own financial history and my memories, creating a detailed ledger of the financial and non-financial support that had flowed through our family. I created 3 columns: event, support for Laura, and support for Loretta. It was a grim but illuminating exercise. I started with major life events. For university, I entered the financial aid my parents had provided for both of us. For me, it was a modest $5,000 contribution towards my tuition over 4 years. For Laura, who went to a more expensive private arts college, it was over $50,000 plus a monthly living stipend. The disparity was stark. Next, first car. My column read, $0 purchased 10-year-old used car with own savings. Laura's column read, $15,000 new car co-signed by dad as graduation gift. First home down payment. My column, $0 currently saving, her. Column, $40,000 gift from mom and dad. I moved on to smaller, recurring things. I estimated the cost of the annual family vacations my parents took with Laura, her husband, and their kids, trips I was never invited on because it was their special grandparent time. I conservatively estimated this at $5,000 per year for the last 5 years. Total, $25,000. I thought about the countless times my mom would mention she'd just popped over to Laura's to babysit so Laura could go to a yoga class or get her nails done. I couldn't put a dollar value on that, so I created a new metric: hours of unpaid labor. For Laura, I estimated at least 10 hours a week of free childcare, house help, and errand running from our mother. For myself, the number was 0. I hadn't asked my parents to babysit a houseplant, let alone a child. The list went on and on. I documented the expensive birthday gifts for her kids, the designer handbags for Laura, the high-end power tools for her husband. My own gifts were always practical and modest: a gift card, a sweater, a book. It was an overwhelming, quantifiable record of inequality. When I finally hit the sum function at the bottom of the spreadsheet, I felt a wave of nausea. Excluding the value of the unpaid labor, the direct financial support for Laura over the last decade exceeded $250,000. The support for me was less than $10,000. Seeing it all laid out in black and white was devastating, but also validating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being overly sensitive or dramatic. The data was irrefutable. I was the family's neglected asset, while my sister was its perpetually funded startup, one that never seemed to turn a profit but always secured another round of investment. The spreadsheet gave me the cold, logical ammunition I needed. My plan began to evolve beyond a simple act of petty revenge. I wasn't just going to send a message. I was going to provide the data to back it up. My response had to be as clinical and detached as their treatment of me. The first step was setting up the payment. I logged into my online banking portal. The request was for $3,000. It was a sum I could now easily afford thanks to my promotion. The irony was thick enough to choke on. They had inadvertently created the means for their own downfall. I initiated a transfer to Laura's account, the one she had so helpfully provided in the group chat. In the amount field, I didn't type 3,000. I typed 0.01, 1 cent. In the memo line, where you might write for Dad's party or Happy Birthday, I wrote a single sentence. A contribution commensurate with the emotional investment I've received. The second step was preparing my exit. I knew the moment that 1 cent transfer hit her account, my phone would explode. There would be rage, confusion, and a torrent of accusations. I had no interest in participating in that conversation. It was a game I could never win because the rules were always written in their favor. So, the only winning move was not to play. I opened my messaging app. I went to the family group chat, the scene of the original crime. I typed out a final message. It wasn't angry or emotional, it was factual. "Hello everyone," I wrote. "I have just sent my contribution for Dad's party gift. Please check your account, Laura. It represents the value I feel my presence and participation currently hold within this family. For years, I have been treated as an afterthought, and my achievements have been met with silence." That silence was a message, and I have now received it. I will no longer be a financial resource for a family that offers no emotional support in return. I am attaching a brief summary of the family's financial and emotional investments over the past 10 years for your reference. The data is quite clear. Do not contact me. I will be taking an indefinite break from all family communication. I attached a screenshot of the spreadsheet. I didn't include the exact dollar amounts as that felt too crude. Instead, I converted the totals into percentages. Total familial support distribution, 2015-2025, Laura 96%, Loretta 4%. The starkness of the numbers was more powerful than any dollar sign. I took a deep breath. My thumb hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. This was the moment I chose my own sanity over the toxic, one-sided charade of our family relationship. I was severing a tie that had been fraying for years. It was terrifying, but it was also the most liberating thing I had ever done. I hit send. Immediately, I blocked Laura's number, then my mother's, then my father's. I left the family group chat and deleted the thread. I went to my social media accounts and blocked all 3 of them, along with a few aunts and cousins who I knew would act as their flying monkeys. It was a digital scorched earth policy, a firewall against the inevitable storm. I turned my phone off and set it aside. The silence in my apartment was absolute, but this time, it wasn't the heavy, painful silence of being ignored. It was a light, peaceful silence of my own making. It was the sound of freedom. For the first few hours after I turned my phone back on, there was nothing. It was an eerie calm before the storm. I had blocked their numbers, but I knew they had other ways of reaching me. Email, social media messages from relatives I hadn't thought to block, a knock on my apartment door. I spent the evening in a state of high alert, my nervous system buzzing. I ate dinner, watched a movie, and tried to distract myself, but my mind kept replaying the moment I hit send. Had I gone too far? Was I a terrible daughter? The guilt was a conditioned response, a ghost limb of the family dynamic I had just amputated. But every time it crept in, I pulled up the image of the spreadsheet on my laptop. 96% versus 4%. The numbers didn't lie. The numbers grounded me in my decision. The storm broke the next morning. It didn't come via a knock on the door, but through an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was a single, furious word. Seriously. It was from Laura, who had clearly created a new email account just to bypass my block. The email was a masterclass in gaslighting and narcissistic rage. It was a long, rambling tirade that swung wildly between disbelief, accusation, and feigned pity for my obviously troubled mental state. She completely ignored the spreadsheet, the core of my argument, as if it didn't exist. Instead, she focused entirely on the penny. 1 cent, Loretta? 1 cent, she wrote, the capitalization doing the work of a shriek. After everything this family has done for you, we give you a chance to be part of a beautiful celebration for your own father, and you spit in our faces with one pathetic penny. What is wrong with you? Dad is heartbroken. Mom has been crying all morning. You've ruined everything. The accusations were textbook. I was selfish. I was ungrateful. I was cruel. She claimed I was jealous of her happy life and her wonderful family, and this was my petty way of lashing out. She said my corporate job had clearly turned me into a cold, heartless robot who only thought in numbers, an ironic accusation, given that she had just demanded a very specific number from me. There was no curiosity about my feelings, no acknowledgement of my promotion, no flicker of introspection about why I might have done what I did. It was all about her and her ruined party plans. The email ended with a dramatic flourish. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to grow up. You owe Mom and Dad a massive apology. And you still owe us the $2,999.99. I read the email twice, and with each reading, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Her reaction was the final piece of data I needed. It confirmed everything. My carefully constructed argument, the years of neglect laid bare in a simple pie chart, had been completely ignored. They were incapable of self-reflection. They saw my action not as a reaction to their behavior, but as a completely unprovoked attack. I had presented them with a mirror, and they had recoiled in horror, blaming the mirror for the reflection. I forwarded the email to Anne with the note, "The fallout has begun." Her reply came back in minutes. "Wow, she didn't even try to pretend she cared about your side of it. This is pure narcissistic injury. Good for you for not engaging. Don't you dare reply to this." I had no intention of replying. Replying would be like arguing with a brick wall. Instead, I marked the email as spam and created a filter to automatically delete any future emails from that address. My digital firewall was holding strong. Later that day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered, my voice cautious. "Hello." "Loretta, it's your Aunt Carol," my mother's sister, one of the flying monkeys. Her tone was syrupy sweet, oozing with concern. "Honey, your mother is just beside herself. She called me in tears. What on earth is going on? She said you sent Laura a penny. It must be some kind of mistake, right?" "No, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice even and calm. "It wasn't a mistake." "But your father's big birthday party, they were so excited." "Loretta, family is the most important thing. Whatever little squabble you're having with your sister, you can't let it hurt your parents like this. Your mother's health isn't what it used to be, you know. The stress is not good for her." There it was, the classic guilt trip, weaponizing my mother's health. It was a tactic they had used for years to get me to fall in line, but it didn't work anymore. "My relationship with my parents and my sister is my business," I said firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but I am not going to discuss it with you." There was a sputtering on the other end of the line. She was not used to me being so direct. "Well, I was just trying to help. You're being incredibly selfish, you know that." "Thank you for your call, Aunt Carol," I said, and I hung up the phone. Then I blocked her number too. The single penny had done its job perfectly. It was small, insignificant, and easily dismissed, just as I had been, but it was also a deliberate and calculated action. It couldn't be misinterpreted as an oversight or a mistake. It was an insult, designed to match the insult I had received. It had forced them to react, and their reactions told me everything I needed to know. They weren't sad that they had hurt me. They were furious that I was no longer willing to be their silent benefactor. The penny wasn't just a penny. It was a declaration of independence. It was the sound of a closing account. And as the day wore on, I realized the most profound thing. I didn't feel guilty anymore. I just felt free. The days following my 1-cent rebellion were a masterclass in extinction bursts. An extinction burst, in behavioral psychology, is the concept that when a behavior that was once reinforced is no longer reinforced, the subject will often escalate that behavior in a last-ditch effort to get the desired response. My family, having been denied their usual reinforcement, my compliance and my money, went into a full-blown, multi-fronted escalation. After my Aunt Carol's failed attempt at emotional manipulation, the next wave of attacks came from more distant relatives. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly started messaging me on social media platforms I'd forgotten I even had. The messages were all variations on a theme, clearly fed to them by Laura and my mother. "I can't believe you're treating your parents this way. Your dad is such a good man, he doesn't deserve this. Family is forever, Loretta. You're going to regret burning this bridge." Each message was a little paper cut. I didn't reply to any of them. I just kept expanding my block list. It felt like I was building a digital fortress, one brick at a time. Each block was a small act of self-preservation. The most shocking attempt came via my work email. On Thursday morning, an email from my father, Martin, appeared in my professional inbox. It was the first time he had ever contacted me directly through that channel. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, hope, maybe. My dad had always been the quietest one, the one most likely to be a passive bystander. Perhaps he was reaching out to understand, to mediate. My hope was quickly extinguished. The email was short, and its tone was one of deep, paternal disappointment, a tone I knew well. It was the voice of a man who saw my actions not as a response to years of inequality, but as a personal betrayal of him. "Loretta," it began, "I don't know what has gotten into you. Your mother is a wreck. Your sister is beside herself. You have turned a happy family celebration into a circus. I have always been proud of you for being the responsible one, the one who never caused any trouble. I see now that I was mistaken. Whatever issues you have, you deal with them in private. You do not air our family's laundry, and you certainly do not disrespect your mother and sister like this. I am deeply disappointed in the person you have. You will fix this." It wasn't a request, it was a command. You will fix this. Not let's talk about this, or help me understand. Just in order to put everything back the way it was, to restore the comfortable status quo where he didn't have to deal with any unpleasantness. And the line about being proud of you for being the one who never caused any trouble was the most telling of all. My value to him was tied to my silence, to my ability to not be a burden. The moment I stood up for myself, I became trouble, and his pride evaporated, replaced by disappointment. There was no mention of my promotion, no acknowledgement of the spreadsheet, no curiosity about the years of hurt that had led to this moment. His email was the final confirmation that he was not a neutral party, he was an active enabler of the system. He benefited from it just as much as my mother and Laura did, because my quiet independence meant he only had to focus his paternal energy in one direction. That email was the one that hurt the most, but it was also the one that solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. Any lingering doubt, any shred of guilt, any thought that I might have overreacted, was incinerated by the cold, dismissive command to fix this. I couldn't fix a system that was fundamentally broken. I could only remove myself from it. I didn't reply to his email. Instead, I forwarded it to my personal email account for my records and then deleted the original. I then spoke to my company's IT department and had them create a rule to filter any emails from my family's personal addresses directly into my trash folder. My professional space was now secure. The climax of their campaign came that Friday evening. I was settling in to watch a movie when there was a loud, insistent knock on my apartment door. My heart leaped into my throat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to the peephole and looked out. My blood ran cold. It was Laura and my mother, standing in the hallway, their faces grim and determined. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just stood there, watching them through the tiny lens. They knocked again, harder this time. "Loretta, we know you're in there." Laura's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy wood of the door. "Open this door right now, we need to talk." "Honey, please," my mother's voice followed, softer but laced with a manipulative tremor. "Don't do this. Let's just talk this out as a family." But we weren't a family having a discussion. This was an ambush. This was an attempt to corner me, to use their physical presence to intimidate me into submission. They knew I was non-confrontational. They were counting on me to cave under the pressure of a face-to-face encounter. I stayed silent, my back pressed against the door. I could hear them whispering furiously in the hallway. After another minute of knocking, Laura's frustration boiled over. "Fine, be a coward, Loretta," she yelled, her voice echoing in the hall. "Hide in your little apartment with your sad little life. But don't you come crying to us when you're all alone. You've made your choice." I heard their footsteps recede down the hallway. I waited until the sound was completely gone, and then for another 5 minutes after that. I finally sagged against the door, my legs feeling like jelly. They had physically shown up at my sanctuary, trying to break down the walls I had so carefully constructed. And I had held my ground. I hadn't opened the door. I hadn't let them in. The fury in my inbox and at my doorstep hadn't broken me. It had only shown me, with blinding clarity, that the fortress I was building was not only necessary, it was my only path to survival. The weeks after the confrontation at my door were quiet. The barrage of emails, messages, and calls stopped. It seemed my family had finally accepted that their tactics weren't working. The silence that descended was different from the one that had started this whole saga. It wasn't the heavy, neglectful silence of their indifference, but the peaceful, clean silence of a boundary being respected. It was a silence I had chosen, and it was restorative. Without the constant, low-level hum of anxiety about my family's next demand or dismissal, I found my world expanding. I had more mental and emotional energy to invest in the people and things that actually brought me joy. I poured myself into my new role at work, and I thrived. The corner office wasn't just a status symbol. It was a physical representation of what I had achieved on my own merit. My team was brilliant and collaborative, and for the first time in my career, I felt like a leader. My friendship with Anne deepened. She had been my rock through the entire ordeal, a constant source of validation and sensible advice. We started a tradition of weekly dinners, exploring new restaurants and talking for hours about everything and nothing. She was the sister I had always wanted, one who celebrated my successes, if they were her own, and one who listened to my struggles without judgment. One evening, over a bottle of wine, I confessed that I still had moments of guilt, a nagging voice in my head that called me a bad daughter. Anne looked at me, her expression serious. "Loretta," she said, "you are mourning the family you wish you had, not the one you actually had. The family you had was a business, and you were its only unsalaried employee. You didn't quit a family, you resigned from an exploitative job. There's a difference." Her words hit me with the force of a revelation. She was right. I had been grieving a fantasy. The reality was the spreadsheet, the years of neglect, the inbox full of fury. Accepting that reality was the key to letting go of the guilt. I started investing in my own life with the same energy I had once reserved for trying to win my family's approval. I used the money I would have spent on their demands and gifts, on myself. I hired a financial advisor and started an aggressive investment plan. I took a weekend trip to the mountains, just because I could. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to do, and discovered I had a knack for it. My apartment slowly filled with my own lopsided, wonderfully imperfect creations. About 2 months after I cut contact, a letter arrived. It was a formal invitation, thick cardstock in a cream-colored envelope. My father's 60th birthday party. My name was printed on it, but the address was handwritten by my mother. They hadn't tried to call or email, they had sent a formal invitation, a final, passive-aggressive attempt to pull me back into the fold. The invitation was a statement. The party was happening, with or without me, with or without my contribution. They were moving on, and this was my last chance to get back in line. I looked at the invitation for a long time. I thought about the jazz trio, the custom cake, and the professional-grade table they had probably bought anyway, perhaps with a loan from my parents. I imagined the scene. My whole family gathered, celebrating my father, with my absence hanging in the air like a ghost. They would toast to family, and someone would undoubtedly mention how sad it was that poor, troubled Loretta couldn't be there. They would paint me as the villain of the story, the cold-hearted daughter who had abandoned them over a little bit of money. And for the first time, I realized I didn't care. Their narrative no longer had any power over me. I knew the truth. I had the spreadsheet. I had the memories. I had the emails and the blocked numbers. Their story was just that, a story they told themselves to avoid facing the uncomfortable truth of their own behavior. I took the invitation, walked over to the paper shredder I kept in my home office, and fed it through. The machine whirred to life, slicing the elegant cardstock into meaningless strips of confetti. It was a small, quiet act, but it felt monumental. It was the final closing of the ledger. My life now is not one of grand, dramatic revenge. It's a quiet, peaceful, and joyful existence built on my own terms. My family is the one I have chosen. My incredible friend Anne, my supportive colleagues, the new friends from my pottery class. These are the people who show up, who celebrate with me, who listen. They are the ones who invest in me, just as I invest in them. Blood may be thicker than water, but it can also be toxic. I learned that true family isn't about obligation or shared DNA. It's about mutual respect, support, and love. It's about who shows up when you get the promotion, not just when they want something. By sending that one penny, I didn't just end a relationship. I bought my freedom. And it was the best investment I ever made.